David Chun sat in his worn Honda Civic, staring at the crumpled $10 bill in his palm. The faded green paper felt thin between his calloused fingers, representing everything he had left until his next unemployment check arrived in 4 days. Through the windshield, the neon sign of Murphy's Diner flickered against the evening sky, its red letters promising home-style meals and comfort he could barely afford. Emma bounced excitedly in the passenger's seat, her 80-year-old face pressed against the window. "Dad, look at all the lights," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Are we really having our celebration dinner here tonight?" Her dark eyes sparkled with the kind of pure joy that made David's chest tighten with both love and guilt. He folded the bill carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Absolutely, sweetheart," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Tonight we celebrate you getting an A on your math test. You worked so hard, and I'm incredibly proud of you." The lie came easily now, this pretense that their dinner out was planned rather than desperate, celebration rather than potentially their last restaurant meal together. Emma clapped her small hands together. "I can't wait to see the menu. Do you think they have chocolate cake?" Her innocent enthusiasm cut through him like a blade. 3 months ago, before the layoffs at Morrison Engineering, chocolate cake would have been a given. Now it represented a luxury that might mean they couldn't afford milk tomorrow. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of kindness in your community. David stepped out of the car and walked around to open Emma's door, a small gesture of normalcy in their increasingly uncertain world. As she slipped her tiny hand into his, he made a silent promise that somehow, some way, he would find a path forward that honored both his pride and his responsibility to give her the life she deserved. The bell above Murphy's Diner door chimed as David and Emma stepped inside. The familiar sense of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around them like a warm embrace, while the soft murmur of conversations created a backdrop of comfort against the uncertainty that had become their constant companion. A weathered waitress with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail approached their booth. Her name tag read Maria, and she carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent years reading people and situations with remarkable accuracy. "Welcome to Murphy's," she said warmly, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of heritage and hard work. "What can I get you folks to drink tonight?" Her gaze lingered on David for just a moment, taking in his clean but worn clothing, the careful way he studied the laminated menu. Emma's eyes widened as she flipped through the colorful pages. "Dad, they have pancakes for dinner," she whispered excitedly. "And look at this huge burger with all the toppings." Her finger traced the glossy photographs while David's stomach clenched as he calculated prices in his head. "Water for both of us, please," David said quietly, noting that drinks would eat into their already impossible budget. Emma looked up at him with questioning eyes, but didn't protest. She had learned not to ask for extras lately, though she couldn't quite understand why. Maria nodded and moved away, but David caught her glancing back at them from behind the counter. There was something in her expression, a recognition that made him shift uncomfortably in the vinyl booth. He had become skilled at hiding their situation, but somehow this stranger seemed to see through his carefully constructed facade of normalcy. 3 months earlier, David had walked into Morrison Engineering for what he thought would be another ordinary Tuesday morning. The coffee was still hot in his mug when his supervisor called him into the conference room, where a woman from Human Resources sat with a folder and an apologetic expression. "Budget cuts," she had explained, her voice professionally sympathetic. "The city contracts have been reduced, and we have to let go of our most recent hires. Your work has been exemplary, David, but unfortunately you were among the last engineers we brought on board." The words had felt surreal then, floating in the sterile air conditioning while his mind raced through calculations. Mortgage payments, Emma's school expenses, groceries, utilities. The severance package would help for a few months, but finding another engineering position in their small town would be nearly impossible. Now, sitting in the diner booth with Emma chattering about her day at school, those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. He had applied to every engineering firm within a 100-mile radius, expanded his search to include drafting positions, even construction management roles that paid half his former salary. The unemployment checks helped, but they covered barely 60% of his previous income. He had sold his motorcycle, canceled their cable subscription, and quietly let Emma's piano lessons lapse. Each sacrifice felt like a small betrayal of the life he had promised to provide for her after her mother died 2 years ago. Emma tugged at his sleeve, bringing him back to the present. "Dad, you're doing that thinking face again," she said with the wisdom that 80-year-olds sometimes possess. "Are you worried about something?" Her concern made his heart ache with the fierce protectiveness that had driven every decision since becoming her sole guardian. Maria returned with 2 glasses of ice water and set them down gently. "I'll give you folks a few more minutes to decide," she said, but David noticed she lingered nearby, wiping down already clean tables while keeping them in her peripheral vision. Emma had pulled out a crumpled homework sheet from her backpack. "Dad, can you help me with this word problem?" she asked, smoothing the paper on the table. "Mrs. Peterson says I'm getting better at the hard ones, but this one about calculating distances is really tricky." David leaned forward, his engineer's mind immediately engaging with the mathematical challenge. "Okay, sweetheart, let's break this down step by step," he said, his voice taking on the patient teaching tone he had perfected during countless homework sessions. "If a train travels at 60 miles per hour for 2 hours, then increases speed to 80 miles per hour for another hour and a half, how far has it gone total?" Emma's brow furrowed in concentration as David guided her through the calculation process. "First, we multiply 60 times 2, which gives us what?" he asked, watching her work through the problem with growing confidence. 120 miles, she said proudly, then continued with his encouragement. "Then 80 times 1.5 equals 120 miles too, so the total is 240 miles. From across the diner, Maria watched this interaction with growing interest. She had witnessed countless families over the years, but something about this man's gentle teaching style and the precision of his mathematical explanation caught her attention. The way he broke down complex concepts suggested someone with formal training, yet his careful study of the cheapest menu items told a different story entirely. After carefully studying the menu for several minutes, David made his choices with mathematical precision. "We'll have the soup and half sandwich special," he told Maria when she returned, and one order of the kids' grilled cheese for Emma. The total came to $8.95, leaving him barely enough for a small tip. Emma looked slightly disappointed, but didn't complain. She had learned to read her father's careful expressions over the past few months. "The grilled cheese will be perfect, Dad," she said with forced cheerfulness that broke his heart into smaller pieces. When Maria brought their food 20 minutes later, the portions were surprisingly generous. The soup bowl was filled to the brim, and Emma's grilled cheese came with extra pickles and a side of fruit that wasn't listed on the menu. David looked up at Maria questioningly, but she simply winked and moved on to another table. As they finished eating, David reached for his wallet with trembling fingers. The moment he had been dreading all evening had arrived. He pulled out his debit card, hoping desperately that somehow there might be enough in the account to cover their modest meal, even though he knew the mathematics of their situation left no room for miracles. The card reader beeped ominously, and Maria's expression shifted to one of gentle concern. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "The transaction was declined." David's face flushed crimson as he fumbled through his wallet, searching for the $10 bill while other diners began to notice the commotion. Emma's eyes widened with the dawning realization that something was terribly wrong, and her small hand reached across the table to touch his arm with 80-year-old wisdom and worry. Before David could pull out the crumpled $10 bill, Maria placed her hand gently over his. "Wait a minute," she said with a bright smile that seemed to illuminate the entire booth. "I just remembered we're running a special promotion tonight for families with school-age children who can solve math problems correctly." She turned to Emma with theatrical enthusiasm. "Since you got that distance problem right earlier, your whole meal tonight is on the house." Emma's confused expression melted into delight, while David stared at Maria in stunned silence. Recognizing the lifeline, she was throwing them both. "This is so cool," Emma whispered, bouncing slightly in her seat. "I've never won anything from a restaurant before. Can we come back next week and try to win again?" Her innocent excitement made both adults smile despite the weight of the moment they were navigating together. Maria began clearing their plates with practiced efficiency, but David noticed something that made him pause. Her movements around their table were careful and precise, and when she picked up Emma's homework sheet that had fallen to the floor, she handled it with the respect of someone who understood the value of education and effort. As she worked, David caught her glancing at his hands where they rested on the table. His palms bore the calluses of recent manual labor from odd jobs he had taken to supplement their income, but his fingers retained the careful precision of years spent drafting blueprints and calculating structural loads. There was something in Maria's expression that suggested recognition, as if she were putting together pieces of a puzzle that others might miss entirely. As Maria refilled their water glasses, she made casual conversation with the skill of someone who had perfected the art of learning about people without seeming intrusive. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my son Miguel is struggling with his engineering prep courses at the community college. Math has never been his strong suit, especially when it comes to those complex calculations." David's posture shifted almost imperceptibly at the mention of engineering, a subtle straightening that didn't go unnoticed by Maria's observant eyes. Emma, meanwhile, was coloring on her napkin with a crayon she had found in her backpack, completely absorbed in creating what appeared to be a drawing of their dinner celebration. "There's this volunteer at the community center," Maria continued, wiping down the table with deliberate slowness. "He comes in twice a week to help kids with math and science homework. Miguel says the man is incredibly patient and can explain the most complicated concepts in ways that actually make sense." She paused, watching David's reaction carefully. "That sounds like a wonderful program," David replied quietly, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been wistfulness or recognition. "Community involvement is so important for helping young people reach their potential." Maria nodded, filing away his choice of words and the way his eyes had lit up when discussing education and mentoring. "Miguel keeps asking if there's any way to thank this volunteer properly," she said. "The man never gives his last name, just says to call him David. He shows up like clockwork, helps anyone who needs it, then disappears until the next session. Miguel says he has the hands of someone who works with blueprints and designs, very precise and careful with measurements and drawings." Maria excused herself and walked toward the kitchen, but instead of placing their order, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed her son's number. Miguel answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of a 19-year-old finally understanding complex engineering principles. "Mom, you should have seen what happened today," Miguel said before she could speak. "That volunteer David helped me figure out how to calculate load-bearing capacities for different beam materials. I actually understood it for the first time, and Mrs. Garcia said my homework was perfect." "Miguel, listen carefully," Maria said, glancing back at David and Emma's booth. "Can you describe this volunteer to me again? What does he look like, and what else do you remember about him?" "Well, he's maybe in his 30s, has dark hair, and he's always really patient with all of us kids. He wears simple clothes, nothing fancy, but he explains things like he's been doing engineering work for years. Oh, and he mentioned once that he has a young daughter who's really good at math. He seemed proud when he talked about her." Maria's heart began to race as the pieces clicked into place. The careful way David had taught Emma the math problem, his precise movements, his reaction to the mention of engineering, and now Miguel's description matching perfectly. She thanked her son quickly and hung up, turning back toward the booth where David sat helping Emma practice writing letters on her napkin. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. The struggling father sitting in her section, counting his last $10 to buy dinner for his daughter, was the same generous man who had been freely sharing his expertise to help her son and dozens of other young people succeed in their studies. Maria walked back to their booth with newfound purpose, her heart heavy with the irony of what she had discovered. She slid into the seat across from David and Emma, lowering her voice to ensure their conversation remained private despite the busy dinner crowd around them. "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me," she said gently, her eyes meeting David's with compassionate directness. "Do you volunteer at the Riverside Community Center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings? Do you help young people with math and engineering concepts?" David's face went pale, his carefully constructed anonymity suddenly shattered. He glanced at Emma, who was still absorbed in her drawing, then back at Maria with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "How did you know?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because my son Miguel talks about you constantly," Maria replied, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "He describes a patient teacher named David who has helped him understand engineering principles that seemed impossible before. A man who gives freely of his time and knowledge, expecting nothing in return." Emma looked up from her drawing, sensing the shift in conversation. "Dad, are you the math teacher Miguel was talking about?" she asked with 80-year-old insight. "Is that why you're always helping kids with their homework at the center when you think I'm playing in the children's room?" David's eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for months. The secret he had kept, the one bright spot in their difficult circumstances, was now exposed. He had found purpose in sharing his knowledge while struggling to find paid work that would utilize his engineering degree and experience. Maria leaned forward with growing excitement, her voice filled with the urgency of someone who had just discovered a solution to multiple problems. "David, there are at least a dozen families whose children you've helped, and they've all been asking how they could possibly thank you properly. They have no idea you're struggling right now." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through contacts. "Mrs. Rodriguez owns the construction company that's expanding the medical center downtown. Mr. Patterson runs the engineering consulting firm on 5th Street. The Johnsons are renovating their entire home and need someone to check their structural plans." David stared at her in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what she was telling him. "These are people whose children I've tutored?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected anything in return. I just wanted to help them succeed." "That's exactly why they want to help you now," Maria replied firmly. "Miguel mentioned that you've been looking for engineering work. What if I told you that half these families own businesses or know people who need exactly the kind of expertise you've been sharing for free?" Emma had stopped drawing entirely, her young face bright with hope as she began to understand that something wonderful might be happening. "Dad, does this mean you might get a real job again?" she whispered, her small hand finding his across the table. Before David could respond, a gruff voice interrupted their conversation. Frank Morrison, the diner's owner, appeared beside their booth with a curious expression. "Maria, what's got you so excited over here?" he asked, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that suggested he had been eavesdropping with growing interest and approval. "Frank," Maria said with barely contained enthusiasm, "meet David Chun. He's the volunteer engineer who's been helping all those kids at the community center, including Miguel. And he's exactly the person you've been looking for to help with the diner expansion plans." Frank's eyebrows shot up as he studied David with newfound interest. "You're the mystery teacher everyone's been talking about?" he asked, extending a calloused hand. "I've been trying to find a qualified engineer for months to help me design the addition out back. The city requires proper structural plans, and every firm I've contacted wants more money than I can afford." David shook Frank's hand, still processing the surreal turn their evening had taken. "I would be honored to look at your plans," he said quietly. "What kind of expansion are you considering?" "Nothing fancy," Frank replied, sliding into the booth beside Maria. "Just want to add a private dining room and expand the kitchen. But the city inspector says I need proper load calculations and architectural drawings. Been putting it off for 2 years because of the cost." Emma tugged at David's sleeve with 80-year-old directness. "Dad, this is like when you helped me with that impossible math problem. Except now you get to help Mr. Frank with his impossible building problem," she said, her logic simple and profound. Frank chuckled at Emma's observation, then turned serious as he looked at David. "If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a consulting contract. Fair pay for fair work, and if the expansion goes well, there are 3 other local businesses I know who need similar help. Word travels fast in a town this size when someone does quality work." 3 months later, David and Emma sat in their regular booth at Murphy's Diner. Their Thursday evening tradition now a celebration rather than a desperate meal. The expanded dining room bustled with activity behind them, a testament to the successful project that had launched David's new consulting business and part-time teaching position at the community center. Emma proudly showed Maria her latest math test, another perfect score that reflected both her natural ability and her father's patient guidance. Maria beamed as she set down their usual order, chocolate cake included, now easily affordable thanks to David's steady income from multiple engineering contracts. Frank appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron as he approached their table. "David, Mrs. Patterson called this afternoon," he announced with satisfaction. "Her neighbor wants to hire you for a home renovation project. That makes 6 referrals this month from families whose kids you've helped." David smiled, his face no longer carrying the weight of desperation that had marked their first visit. The irony wasn't lost on him that his volunteer work, done purely from a desire to help others, had become the foundation of his professional recovery and Emma's renewed security. As they finished their dinner, David noticed a young father at a corner booth counting crumpled bills while his daughter colored with restaurant crayons. He caught Maria's eye and nodded toward the struggling family, understanding passing between them without words spoken. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know about a time when someone's hidden kindness changed your day, or if you've been that person for someone else. The cycle of compassion continued, quiet and powerful as the evening light faded outside Murphy's Diner.